The National Desk, America's News, now.
Is the term gaslighting appropriate?
Oh, for sure.
A Boeing whistleblower on a mission, speaking out for the first time on camera about his concerns with the company's safety practices. Plus, the defense rests, the prosecution rests, and now we wait. The former president avoids taking the stand in his criminal hush money trial. When to expect closing arguments. And later, deflating pump prices, the president's move to lower costs ahead of the summer travel season. Why some argue it won't help. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. Thank you for joining us on this weekend edition. We take a look at the big headlines of the week and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with the 4 big stories we've been following this week. False and extremely dangerous. Attorney General Merrick Garland responds after Trump claims the FBI was ready to kill him while searching Mar-a-Lago. Facing questions, President Biden takes his stance on arrest warrants for top Israeli and Hamas leaders. What he said about the International Criminal Court. Feeling the heat, Americans coast to coast facing hotter temperatures ahead of the start of summer. The states expecting the opposite. But first, stuck in a stalemate. What comes next in the fight over the border crisis? The Senate has once again rejected a bill crafted to try to improve the situation at the southern border. The crisis has become front and center in the 2024 presidential race, with both Democrats and Republicans now digging in their heels on who's to blame. Here's the National Desk, Christine Frizzell.
It's take 2 on Capitol Hill at an attempt to pass what was a bipartisan border bill.
The motion is not agreed to.
The legislation, which was endorsed by the National Border Patrol Union, provides more money to fight fentanyl smuggling and to hire more Border Patrol agents and immigration judges. It also tightens asylum rules. It was crafted with the help of conservative Oklahoma Senator James Lankford, who ended up voting against it.
It's no longer a bill, now it's a prop.
While a handful of Democrats also oppose the bill, most insist it's a sign Republicans, who have long called the situation at the border a crisis, are all talk and no action. With a warning, voters will be upset they blocked it.
When they hear that the only reason Republicans are backed away from this bill is not that it wasn't strong enough, but that Donald Trump said he wanted chaos at the border, they don't like that.
The White House asked on Wednesday why President Biden isn't doing more with his executive authority.
Why should he have to do it unilaterally? Why should we do it in a legislative way? In order to deal with what's happening at the border, in order to deal with a broken immigration system, you need law.
But it's a law many others say could incentivize more people to come.
You don't disagree with more border agents or more immigration judges?
I'll never disagree with more resources. However, we can't have a bill out there that gives President Biden the cover to break the law.
Joseph Edlow, former acting director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, argues the bill codifies what he calls catch and release for those who claim credible fear. Instead of giving them immediate hearings, they would be released and given work authorizations.
There are legitimate people seeking protection, but the majority of people that we are seeing coming across right now are economic migrants, and the way Congress has written the law, that is not a grounds for protection in this country.
With Congress unable to move this, the question now is if President Biden will take matters into his own hands to the extent that he can. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National Desk.
Right now, President Biden is facing questions on the International Criminal Court after the entity requested arrest warrants for top Israeli officials and Hamas leaders earlier this week. Biden reiterated his position on the matter during a joint press conference with the president of Kenya.
We don't recognize the jurisdiction of ICC the way it's being exercised, and it's that simple. We don't think there's an equivalence between what Israel did and what Hamas did.
The ICC's prosecutor accuses Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his defense minister, and 3 Hamas leaders of war crimes and crimes against humanity. A panel of 3 judges will decide whether to issue the arrest warrants, a process that could take 2 months. False and extremely dangerous. Attorney General Merrick Garland using those exact words to describe former President Trump's claims the FBI was ready to kill him during their search of Mar-a-Lago. In a fundraising email on Wednesday, Trump claimed Biden was locked and loaded and ready to take me out. Garland said the document that has been referred to in the allegation is the Justice Department's standard policy limiting the use of force. Both sides have rested in the New York criminal hush money trial of former President Donald Trump. As the National Desk Matt Gelka tells us, the jury will now have a few days to process what they've heard from witnesses before closing arguments next week.
And we'll be resting pretty quickly. Resting meaning resting the case. I won't be resting. I don't rest.
Donald Trump did not take the stand in his hush money trial as his defense rested following their final witness's testimony.
I'm always ready.
Robert Costello, a former advisor to Michael Cohen, wrapped up his testimony that attacked the credibility of the star witness. Cohen is at the center of the 34 alleged criminal counts tying Trump to hush money payments, including to porn star Stormy Daniels, made in order to not derail his 2016 presidential campaign.
He lies whenever it suits his own personal interest.
We caught up with Costello last week, before he took the stand and after he appeared in front of Congress, calling Michael Cohen a liar. Costello had appeared before a grand jury last year that eventually indicted Trump.
I had all these emails and text messages that the prosecutors did not put into evidence. They cherry-picked, I think, either 3 or 6 out of 300 that they presented to the grand jury.
While Costello tried to undermine Cohen's trustworthiness for the defense, prosecutors brought up some of his emails from 2018 with Cohen. Costello, who had served as Rudy Giuliani's attorney, denied trying to be a back channel for Cohen to the former president and his inner circle. The prosecution asked Costello about a number of emails, including one from Costello telling Cohen his relationship with Giuliani could be useful to him. Cohen wrapped his own testimony Monday when he admitted he stole thousands from the Trump organization.
I think that cross-examination was a bullet that is strong for the defense. In most criminal cases, closing arguments aren't that important. The jury's usually made up their mind. I don't think the jury's made up their mind in this case.
The former president continued to say there was no crime as the trial is now on break until next Tuesday, when closing arguments are set to be delivered. For the National Desk in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka.
In a 6-3 decision this week, the Supreme Court upheld a South Carolina congressional map rejecting the argument raised by civil rights groups that lawmakers impermissibly used race as a proxy to bolster the GOP's chances. Liberal Justice Elena Kagan wrote in a dissent arguing that the majority will give state lawmakers and map makers, quote, an incentive to use race as a proxy to achieve partisan ends. Talking about your money now, the Biden administration announced student loan cancellations for another 160,000 borrowers. The latest round of forgiveness will erase more than $7 billion in federal student loans. It's possible through a combination of existing programs, including President Biden's new income-driven repayment plan. Still, Biden's plans face legal challenges from Republican-led states. Parents are increasingly feeling the pain of inflation. A new Federal Reserve survey shows 64% living with children under 18 said they were doing all right financially in 2023. That's down from 69% in 2022. Parents say inflation is their biggest financial challenge, with some households reporting paying as much on child care as they did housing. Summer officially begins on the summer solstice between June 20th and 22nd, but many across the U.S. are already feeling those hotter temperatures. We definitely are. I'm with Courtney from the Fact Check team, and this April was Earth's warmest on record, and the U.S. could experience even more record temperatures over the next few months.
That's exactly right. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration releases new climate predictions every 90 days. And the latest one shows hotter than normal temperatures in almost every single state. Take a look. The only part of the U.S. that's expected to have cooler than average temperatures is southwestern Alaska, while parts of the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Iowa have equal chances of summer being normal, hotter, or cooler than average.
And this could actually be one of the hottest summers on record.
That's exactly right. I looked into it, and this summer could rival last summer, which, according to NASA, was Earth's hottest since global records started back in 1880. Then we saw a tie between the summer of 2021 and the summer of 1936, also known as the Dust Bowl.
All right, can't wait for my cooling bill.
I know.
Courtney, thank you. It's also expected to be an above average hurricane season. Courtney will join us in just a bit with more on that. As you make your summer travel plans, the Biden administration is releasing 1 million barrels of gasoline from a Northeast reserve in an effort to lower gas prices. The Energy Department says releasing the reserve ahead of the July 4th holiday will ensure a sufficient supply gets to the tri-state area and the rest of the Northeast when needed most. Tapping the reserves is a step the president can take on his own to tackle inflation. Critics say the president is just playing politics ahead of the election. Baltimore's former top prosecutor Marilyn Mosby has avoided jail time after she was previously convicted for perjury and mortgage fraud. Mosby was sentenced to time served and a year of home confinement. She was found guilty last year for lying about her finances during the pandemic in order to withdraw $90,000 from her retirement fund. She was also found guilty in a separate trial earlier this year for lying on loan paperwork to get a lower interest rate for a Florida condo. The city of Minneapolis is facing a new lawsuit that involves disgraced police officer Derek Chauvin. A woman who works with the city's public works department says Chauvin pulled her from her minivan in 2020 and pinned her to the ground with his knee, like he did when he killed George Floyd 4 months later. The woman claims she suffered a broken tooth, constant shoulder pain, anxiety, and depression. She's now seeking more than $9 million in damages. Coming up next here on the National Desk, backlash for Boeing. A former employee turned whistleblower joins us for an exclusive interview, claiming the company put profit over passenger protection. Plus, entertainment giants sued Ticketmaster and Live Nation in legal limbo, how it could ripple through the industry. Looking ahead, Boeing says it is on track to meet U.S. regulators' deadline next week to present quality control fixes for its assembly line. The Federal Aviation Administration ordered the plan after a door plug blew out of an airborne 737 MAX in January. The FAA said its audit of the production line at Boeing and its key 737 MAX supplier found multiple alleged failures to comply with manufacturing quality control requirements. We have an exclusive interview with a former Boeing investigator turned whistleblower. Roy Irvin worked on the 787 Dreamliner in South Carolina. Senior investigative reporter Ann Emerson traveled to Roy's home state, far away from South Carolina, and is back to tell his story.
Roy Irvin is speaking publicly on camera for the first time, not because he wants to bring Boeing down, but because Roy says there are great people at the company who love building airplanes as much as he did. People who want to see Boeing succeed. Roy says that can only happen if safety comes first. Roy worked alongside another whistleblower, John Barnett, who died after coming forward to voice major concerns about quality and safety. Roy is on a mission to finish what Barnett started.
What is it about it that you love about flying?
I just love airplanes. I like the way they operate, and I'm a mechanical guy anyway. The airplane has to go through.
Roy Irvin found his calling at Boeing, South Carolina in 2009. He was an investigator and helped make sure that those brand new $250 million 787 Dreamliners were ready to take off. And he knew what was at stake.
Not only are there 300 people on some of those airplanes, but each one of those people have loved ones at home, mothers, fathers, children, that anything would affect.
To protect those families, he filed ethics complaints.
I've been a whistleblower my entire time at Boeing. It just didn't really get any ears until recently.
Roy says there was too much focus on the bottom line, not safety.
When you would see a problem, what happened?
When I would see a problem and then we would try to pursue corrective action, at times my quality leadership would discourage us and would tell us not to write or pursue corrective actions.
What did you think when that happened?
I pushed back almost every time. I was told directly by a senior quality leader not to pursue a corrective action after I'd already agreed to do one.
So you knew you were right?
I knew I was right, yeah.
Roy says problems on the 787s were ignored, canceled, or became other issues.
Is the term gaslighting appropriate?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that was, and that's a common practice at the Boeing company, yes.
Burned out, Roy left in 2020. He now lives 2 hours from the closest airport.
I knew I would miss it. I knew it would be probably difficult, but I just needed a breath of fresh air.
But he didn't give up. Roy's former colleague turned whistleblower, John Barnett, was blazing a trail, standing up to Boeing, and Roy was ready to stand with him.
He was a lighthouse for the whistleblower activity. He was probably the first, one of the pioneers, I'd say.
It was the beginning of March, and Barnett was in the middle of giving his deposition. There was intense pressure. Roy had just given his deposition in John Barnett's lawsuit when he learned his friend was dead. According to police, John shot himself in Charleston on the last day of depositions. And just because he died doesn't mean the lawsuit fell apart. Lawyers say Barnett has every file and email to back up his claims.
Is Boeing too big to fail?
I don't know. I've heard that before, but I think they need some serious regulatory intervention.
Reporting for the National Desk, I'm Ann Emerson.
Boeing just released a statement about Roy's claims. They said since he left in 2020, there have been changes, saying this: Boeing takes very seriously any allegation of improper work or unethical behavior. We continuously encourage employees to report concerns as a priority is to ensure the safety of our airlines and the flying public. And we will take any necessary action to ensure our airplanes meet regulatory requirements. Boeing employees can anonymously report concerns through our Speak Up portal or directly to the FAA. The Justice Department just filed a lawsuit seeking to break up Live Nation, alleging that the parent company of Ticketmaster violated antitrust laws and created a monopoly over the live events industry. The National Desk, Jeff Harris, explains what this lawsuit could mean for fans looking to buy tickets.
For anyone looking to buy tickets to a show or maybe a game, the hope is that this will help drive prices down. Now, experts tell us to make that happen, there's a long road ahead, but this lawsuit starts that process.
In the lawsuit filed by the Department of Justice, it alleges that Live Nation is harming the entire live entertainment industry.
They can basically charge prices that they wouldn't otherwise be able to charge for tickets.
The Associate Dean of Research at the Florida State College of Law, Jake Linford, tells us that's why the DOJ feels it needs to step in to try and force Live Nation to make changes.
Then they may be able to get damages, consent decree, change in behavior from Live Nation or Ticketmaster.
The lawsuit alleges that Live Nation directly manages more than 400 artists, controls around 60% of concert promotions at major venues, and has control of roughly 80% of ticketing through Ticketmaster, creating a monopoly over the market.
It's really the single player in the concert market.
The lawsuit, which was filed in New York, is being backed by 30 states. Something litigation attorney Jeremy Wilson says shows that this is a big issue.
So there seems to be a broad consensus amongst the states and the federal government that there's a problem here that needs to be addressed.
So if the lawsuit is successful, what does that mean for consumers? Wilson says one possibility could result in more options to buy tickets, likely dropping prices.
So ideally, if there's competition that brings down those fees, a lot of those fees that are inflated can go away because you'll have a competitor who will want to undercut Ticketmaster and sell them for cheaper.
Live Nation did post a response to the lawsuit on its website, saying in part that net profits show Live Nation and Ticketmaster do not wield monopoly power and that this lawsuit distracts from real solutions that would help decrease prices and also protect fans. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
Ahead on the national desk, the Baltimore bridge collapse fueling drivers' fears, how it's causing an increase in customers for one Maryland business. Plus, you've heard of a 30-year mortgage, but what about 40? How a credit union in California is attempting to make home ownership more accessible. The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Maine, where a family is warning others after a lithium-ion battery caught fire in their home.
It was very much so like a scene in a movie.
Tabby Dunphy was going inside her Freiburg home when she smelled something burning.
I opened the door and I immediately could obviously tell what was going on. It was kind of just billowing in the house.
The cause, according to the fire chief, a battery-powered leaf blower being stored upstairs. The Dunphys say it was the battery from this Ryobi 40-volt leaf blower trimmer combo kit they bought at Home Depot in 2021.
I know that they're, they can be intense, but I never thought they would self-ignite and cause this kind of damage.
A Ryobi spokesperson sent us a statement saying they're saddened by what happened and is investigating if the product was involved while still standing by the company's quality, performance, and safety. Brian O'Connor with the National Fire Protection Association says there could be manufacturing errors, physical or water damage, and more that can cause this.
To Maryland, where a business driving people over the Chesapeake Bay Bridge is seeing an uptick in business. During the summer, the chauffeur service usually receives 6 or 7 calls a day, and now they say they're getting up to 40 following the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore.
It's really the fear of driving over the bridge. I never used to have it, and then I had a really big panic attack going westbound one time, and I was done after that.
The business says Maryland transportation officials have already contacted them to provide the same service in Baltimore once the Key Bridge is rebuilt. To Fresno, California, where the price of homes has risen 45% in the last 4 years. One local credit union is introducing a new 40-year mortgage to help those who would otherwise be unable to afford a traditional 30-year plan.
We know that interest rates have gone up, and we know that the number of houses on the market have gone down, making home ownership not only more difficult, but also more difficult to afford.
The new mortgage plan can lower payments by $300 to $500. The interest rates on the 40-year plan are higher, but homeowners are able to refinance or pay in full after 10 years. Just ahead, Microsoft releasing a first-of-its-kind computer, how the new technology accesses artificial intelligence without any internet connection. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now. For the first time, the number of Americans who use marijuana every day has surpassed the number who drink that often. About 40% of cannabis users say they're using it daily or near daily. A new study found SNAP benefits don't cover the cost of putting food on the table in 98% of U.S. counties. The average modestly priced meal costs $3.37, 19% more than the average SNAP benefit. Consumer Reports has released its list of the safest, most affordable vehicles for teen drivers. The list includes 58 used models priced between $5,800 and $20,000. Those stories and much more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. Microsoft has introduced a new category of computer with artificial intelligence features. The company says its Surface laptop and Surface Pro tablet can run select AI tasks without internet connectivity. The devices, dubbed as Copilot Plus PCs, will feature a recall, which helps users to find previous data and files, translate audio, and suggest responses to incoming messages. They start at $1,000 and will be available next month. Apple Music announced the top 10 best albums of all time this week. Lauryn Hill's 1998 classic, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, snagged the #1 slot. Michael Jackson's 1982 Thriller comes at #2, and the Beatles' 1969 Abbey Road slips into #3. The top 10 rounds out with albums by artists including Prince, Stevie Wonder, Nirvana, and Beyonce. Ahead in our next half hour, AI impacting the 2024 elections, the deepfake black hole, and what can be done about it. Hurricane season just around the corner, the record number of named storms predicted, and the reason behind the likely uptick. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back.
The National Desk, America's News, now.
Misinformation now gets put on steroids in election context.
Bad actors abusing AI, why Americans are worried fake photos or videos could trick them this election season. Plus, inflation scapegoat, the new report casting doubt on greedflation as the Federal Reserve reveals the true drivers behind still elevated prices. And later, waking up from a bad dream, why doctors are linking an increase in graphic nightmares to a specific chronic disease. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and a new poll shows the majority of Americans are concerned bad actors will use artificial intelligence to negatively impact the presidential election this November. The National Desk, Janae Bowens, has a closer look at their concerns.
The AI concerns are real for voters looking to cast their ballots this November.
They're concerned about deep fakes and other ways that misinformation now gets put on steroids in election context. So they're worried just about misinformation and disinformation and how they can be manipulated by that.
Lee Rainey with Elon University says their poll found 78% of Americans fear abuses of artificial intelligence will affect the 2024 presidential election.
Americans are all stirred up about the campaign to begin with, and now this just adds to the drama of it. The other thing that was so striking in the findings is that lots of Americans say they can't trust themselves to detect fake information from real information, fake photos, fake videos, fake audio. And so they're admitting that they are confused in an environment like this and struggling in it, and they even think worse of other Americans.
About 7 in 10 think most voters are unable to detect fake photos and video, and nearly half doubt their own abilities to spot digitally altered media like this.
It's important that you save your vote for the November election. Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again.
That AI-generated robocall imitating President Joe Biden telling people not to vote in New Hampshire's primary election was going around earlier this year. The Department of Homeland Security has warned state and local leaders to be on high alert for this type of fake content.
AI experts say all of us should be skeptical of political content, especially if something seems too stereotypical, and check it with multiple reliable sources. That survey also found 93% of Americans think some penalties should be applied to candidates who maliciously use AI. I'm Janae Bowens reporting.
The man accused of impersonating President Biden's voice on a robocall has been indicted. Steve Kramer is facing several counts, including intimidation and suppression and impersonation of candidates. The political consultant admitted he commissioned the call using artificial intelligence to sound like the president. The call discouraged New Hampshire voters from taking part in the state's Democratic presidential primary in January. New numbers show President Biden's approval rating has fallen to its lowest level in nearly 2 years. A new Reuters Ipsos poll reveals just 36% of Americans approve of his job performance, down from 38% in April. This latest reading could be a warning sign for his re-election effort. The state of the economy was seen as the top issue in the poll, with about 40% of voters saying former President Trump had better policies for the U.S. economy. The U.S. Supreme Court is allowing Maryland to keep its assault weapons ban. This week, the justices declined to hear a challenge to the state's law banning 45 firearms, including the AR-15. The case is currently being considered by the Fourth Appeals Court, but it hasn't released a decision. The dispute is likely to end up back before the Supreme Court once the appeals court rules. The Texas Medical Board held a virtual meeting this week for the public to share its opinions on proposed exemptions to the state's near total abortion ban. Most of the speakers were physicians asking for clarity on the medical exemptions, which they say should be more specific. That way, doctors aren't held accountable for using their own judgment to determine what constitutes saving the life of a patient.
It will only make my life as a physician feel more defensive and less certain of what they can and cannot do in emergency medical situations.
The Texas Medical Board will make its final decision on the proposed rule at next month's board meeting. In your money, a new Harris poll shows how high inflation is impacting Americans' view of the economy. 56% of people believe the economy is in a recession, even though data shows the opposite. Meantime, 49% think the unemployment rate is at a 50-year high when it's actually at a 5-decade low. The poll also showed little change in Americans' economic outlook from last year as this year's election approaches. Many Americans are still getting crushed financially by high prices at grocery stores and rent, while at the same time, many companies are making record profits. A new report could clear up this debate. Joining Angelo Brown to discuss is Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union.
I want to start with this report that just came out from the San Francisco Fed. It found that corporate price gouging was not a prime driver of rise in inflation in 2021 and 2022. Now, here's a portion of what was said. Analysis suggests that fluctuations in price markups were not a main driver of the post-pandemic surge in inflation, nor of the recent disinflation that started in mid-2022. Of course, when we talk about markups, we're talking about the difference between selling price and also the cost to make it here. Now, they found that markups rose. They are admitting that in different sectors like the auto industry, but was not the main driver here of inflation. So what does this tell us as consumers? Are companies off the hook here?
I mean, I think largely, yes. The data shows that, they're not marking up prices at a rate that was higher than pre-pandemic. So corporations are largely not to blame with this runaway inflation. That doesn't mean that they're off the hook in terms of rhetorics. We're certainly going to get a lot of politicians on the left. Joe Biden has made this one of the centerpieces of his recent campaign speech, that corporations are driving inflation, that they're the boogeyman, that they are these evil entities that are making everything more expensive. Of course, that's not true based on this report. There are a lot of other factors in play, including a lot of the policies that Biden himself have enacted.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is obviously becoming a political issue, dividing the parties here. You have some progressive groups like the Groundwork Collaborative think tank. They had their own report that they said 53% of inflation during the last quarter accounted for companies and, of course, the prices. They say companies are keeping the prices high even as inflationary costs go down. Something the Biden administration has said as well. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, not to beat up on this report, but I think they really misinterpret a lot of economic data. Just one case in point to that, they look at the increase in consumer prices relative to producer prices and say because there's a gap there, that it must be firms that are responsible, companies that are responsible for this increase in inflation, when the truth is that same phenomenon exists before the pandemic and when inflation was at 1.4%. So obviously there's a lot more going on. I think they're missing the big picture here, and the San Francisco Fed report is a lot more accurate when it comes to painting this inflation picture.
But listen, greed is a thing. In fact, we have a term for it. It's being called greedflation. It's something that is being pushed by the Biden administration. How do you define that?
Well, greedflation is this notion that because the economy is in such turmoil right now, because in this post-pandemic period, that corporations are swooping in and taking advantage of American consumers by raising prices, by shrinking package sizes, and so forth. It's just that the economic data doesn't support that. Of course, there's a lot of frustration out there from Americans, and it's always easy to point to corporations because they are large and because they do wield significant power in this economy. But the truth is, they're also very much beholden to consumer demand. Consumer demand has been sky high since the pandemic, since we started injecting trillions and trillions of dollars into this economy through bad fiscal and monetary policy. That is one of the reasons why our inflation rate in the United States is higher than that of China, of Japan, of Europe, of Canada. We have a very high inflation rate here, and a lot of it is because of really bad fiscal policies.
How do you square that when people at home, they buy a bag of chips and they look in that bag and there are fewer chips in the bag, shrinkflation? How do you square that for people at home when they see these record profits and they see less food in these bags and they're wondering, are they getting played here? Are they losing out?
No, I mean, the fact is everything has gotten more expensive, not just for consumers, but for producers as well. Because to make those chips, guess what? Labor costs are higher because of regulations, because of broad economic trends. energy costs are higher, real estate costs are higher. Virtually everything is more expensive. So if everything gets more expensive, that pushes prices up. And when you have high consumer demand, which we've had, it's been kind of a bizarre phenomenon. The consumer demand has been so high throughout the pandemic. That's what's driven prices and reduced those portion sizes. Unfortunately, what we're starting to see is consumer demand falling. We're starting to see retailers report more just concerning earnings reports, and I think the positive side of that is that could lower inflation. The downside of that is that 2/3 of our economy is based on consumer spending, and that could signify an economic downturn.
All right, thank you so much, Brandon. Of course, thank you again, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayer Union. Take care. See you later.
Thanks, Angela.
Developing now, the American Academy of Pediatrics is reversing course on its guidance for mothers with HIV. The new report says moms who are taking medication to suppress HIV can breastfeed their babies if the virus is undetectable. The group also notes that the risk of transmission is very low, but not zero. Previously, the Academy recommended mothers with HIV not breastfeed their infants. Well, you may want to head to the doctor if you're experiencing horrific nightmares lasting into the day. Bad dreams can signal the onset of lupus and several systemic autoimmune diseases. That's according to a new study published in the journal eClinical Medicine. Researchers found 3 in 5 patients with lupus had increasingly graphic nightmares before they hallucinated. It was the same case for 1/3 of patients with other autoimmune diseases. Researchers say this could be a sign that an established illness is likely to flare.
Hurricane season is quickly approaching. It officially begins on June 1st. I'm with Courtney from the Fact Check team. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they released its forecast for the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. What can we expect?
So experts predict an above average hurricane season with as many as 25 named storms, which is the most the agency has ever predicted. Looking into the specifics, NOAA forecasts between 17 and 25 total named storms, which have winds of 30 miles per hour and above. Of those, 8 to 13 are predicted to become hurricanes, which have winds of 74 miles per hour or higher. And that includes 4 to 7 major hurricanes, category 3, 4, or 5. And for context, there were 20 named storms last year, which was the 4th most active season on record.
What does a typical season look like?
That's a good question. So based on data from 1991 to 2020, an average Atlantic hurricane season has 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. The first named storm typically happens in mid to late June, the first hurricane in early to mid-August, and the first major hurricane in late August or early September.
And the big question, why?
So there are a bunch of factors at play here, one being record warm temperatures in the Atlantic. La Nina conditions are also expected in the Pacific, which increase the number of hurricanes that develop and allow stronger storms to form. Because La Nina causes less wind and shear in the Atlantic, and wind shear can essentially break storms apart.
Okay, we're going to continue to track this. Courtney, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com.
Still to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from action on the border crisis to a new Russian space weapon.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, reporting on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. Our team of correspondents is here to share their insights and the stories they've been covering. Former President Donald Trump's legal issues in the headlines again this past week. National correspondent Matt Galka, give us an update in his hush money trial and what's going on with his classified documents case, too.
Yeah, Steve, lots to keep up with here in New York. The jury home for about a week, sent home for the Memorial Day holiday, and they're supposed to hear closing arguments in that case starting on Tuesday. They've heard from about 22 witnesses, 20 for the prosecution, 2 for the defense, including the star witness, so-called star witness, Michael Cohen, the so-called Trump fixer, and also witnesses from the defense used to undermine Cohen's credibility. Analysts for this one say maybe the jury's still undecided and those closing arguments will be pretty important important to ultimately deciding one of the most historic trials we've ever seen, certainly unprecedented for a former president. Now, meanwhile, in Florida, another potential criminal case for Donald Trump, the federal case for the classified documents that Trump allegedly took from the White House and moved to Mar-a-Lago. That one pretty bogged down right now. No date set right now. It was supposed to start this week, but because of a number of disputes between the prosecution and the defense over how that classified information is going to be handled in court, suspended indefinitely on that one, much to the prosecution's frustration. Slow moving there. But first, we have that New York trial to decide, and jury deliberation could begin next week.
Meanwhile, the border security in the news again this past week. National correspondent Christine Frizzell, politics still getting in the way of major border security policy, isn't it?
Yeah, Steve, it's that time of year, 6 months out from the election, where we don't necessarily expect big things to happen here on Capitol Hill. Nevertheless, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer brought up for a vote a border bill that did have bipartisan support. This was the second attempt here. Conservative Republican Senator James Lankford, one of the original authors of the bill, called the vote an attempt at messaging. He actually voted against it, along with nearly every Republican, and said the bill, didn't go far enough, and laid out reasons why they argue it could actually make things worse. A handful of Democrats also voted no, and in some ways, we're back to square one. So we're hearing President Biden may now take matters into his own hands. This would likely happen in the next couple weeks after Mexico's June 2nd election. We could hear about executive orders he plans to take. But, over the last few days, we've been hearing from the White House that this should be solved by Congress. Democrats, by the way, say Republicans don't care about the border because they blocked this opportunity to make things better. Meanwhile, we are still seeing between 4,000 and 5,000 migrants arrive in this country each and every day, the vast majority of whom appear to be economic migrants. These are people who want a job, they want better lives for themselves and their families, but they don't actually qualify for asylum under current law.
And national correspondent Kayla Gaskins on another topic, foreign policy. Russia launched a new weapon this past week. Tell us why this one has the Pentagon and lawmakers on edge.
Well, we got confirmation from the Pentagon earlier this week that Russia has launched what's called a counter space weapon into outer space, and it's actually in the same orbit on the same path as a U.S. government satellite. So that's something that the Pentagon, the Defense Department likely finds very concerning, something they're keeping a close eye on. Now, we already know through U.S. intelligence that Russia has been working on developing a nuclear weapon for space. We don't know what kind of weapon was launched, but we do know they are developing a weapon with nuclear capability for space, and we know that they launched a weapon into space earlier this month. So if you put those two together, it's not a great situation. Now, we dug into what would happen if a nuclear weapon were, say, detonated in space. And see, what would happen is it would take out all of the satellites in whatever specific level of orbit that it ends up with, not just American satellites, but Russian satellites and Chinese satellites. So we talked to some experts and say, why would Russia want to even knock out their own satellites? What kind of advantage would that even give? And the United States, more than Russia, more than China, relies on satellites for most of our defense activity and most of our everyday lives. There would be no GPS. There would be no internet. We'd be back to using landline phones. And it was something that would take months, if not years, to get back on track.
Kayla, Christine, Matt, excellent reporting as always. Thank you all for your hard work. Back to you.
Ahead on the national desk, saving lives. One state moving to toughen up its drunk driving laws in order to protect drivers out on the roads. Plus, cannabis concerns, vape pens laced with THC found in Virginia's schools, prompting local leaders to call for reform. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From concerns over vapes being laced with deadly drugs in Virginia to a new DUI law in South Carolina aimed at saving lives. We're taking the pulse of America, but we start with several arrests after a chaotic police chase in Washington state.
Don't start the car! It is Breaking Bad meets Midland, Washington. No! It started with deputies getting a call about an illegally parked RV. When they approached, body camera video shows the driver in a drug-induced psychosis. Yet he then snaps out of it and drives off. Don't start the car! Don't start the car! Don't get arrested! Start the car! No! The chase was then on. Despite low speeds, the driver eventually ditched this moving RV outright, leading it to careen right into a nearby patrol car. Is this yours? Yeah. Body camera video then shows a foot chase leading to an epic takedown. Inside this drug den, major stashes of both meth and fentanyl. A wacky, crazy chase, no doubt, but with nobody hurt.
It will apply to all convicted DUI offenders instead of just some of the first-time offenders, and that difference is huge when it comes to protecting public safety and saving lives.
The ignition interlock system is designed so a person would have to blow into a device in their car in order to start the ignition. To prevent someone from cheating the device, there is also a camera that shows who is blowing into the device.
We are fortunate in South Carolina that we have the staff to review the logs that come in. And so when we see a violation, we have staff that are able to look at it and reconcile it to see if it's actually the restricted driver giving the sample or not.
From now on, every person convicted of a DUI will have one of these devices installed in their vehicle.
Every one of these collisions, every one of these injuries, and every one of these deaths was preventable. The drivers just simply had to make the right choice to not drink and drive.
It's a growing issue, and it's a growing issue amongst the younger folks.
On May 8th, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office responded to a suspected student overdose at Broad Run High School. They treated the student, but it turned out to be a medical emergency related to vaping. On May 3rd, the Sheriff's Office says they responded to a suspected student overdose at John Champ High School. And on January 31st, they responded to a suspected student overdose at the Academies of Loudoun. Those two incidents turned out to be related to vaping and THC.
The biggest concern we have are the vapes that have THC in them because the THC is extremely potent.
What we're seeing is really, really bad actors lacing everything from counterfeit drugs all the way through to cartridges for vape pipes with fentanyl. And it's killing Virginians.
Still ahead here, the stories making headlines next week, from high-stakes elections in Texas to the case of a missing mother in Connecticut. Looking ahead to stories making headlines this week, on Tuesday, Spain, Ireland, and Norway say they will officially recognize Palestine as a state. The move could generate recognition from other EU countries. Also happening Tuesday, Texas holding runoff elections that could determine the political direction of the state. More than half a dozen Republican incumbents have been forced into runoffs with farther right candidates. On Friday, a sentencing hearing is set for a woman accused of conspiring to murder Connecticut mother Jennifer Dulos. Dulos went missing 5 years ago after dropping her kids off at school. AAA is reporting Memorial Day weekend will be one of the busiest travel weekends in nearly 2 decades. 44 million people expected to travel 50 miles or more. That's a 4% increase from last year. 38 million drivers also predicted to be hitting the road. The sky is expected to be just as busy. AAA estimates more than 3.5 million people will be flying this weekend, which is making for the most crowded Memorial Day weekend at airports since 2005. And to our vets, we are thinking of you this Memorial Day. That'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings and watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.